So here's the thing about happily ever after, that myth that we all aspire to. It was created when the lifespan was less than 40 years old, when people had very few options in life. So it's not really relevant to our current world. There was a lot of poverty, a lot of suffering, and they're kind of escapist fantasies, fairy tales. The pauper marries into great wealth, and everybody's well, and everybody's happy. So it was born from people's desperate need for hope and to escape. And it makes our hearts sing. It's a beautiful story. There's a lot of wonderful things about that story that we want to keep, but it's not really relevant to the lives that we're living today.
Hello everyone, this is Kristina Mand-Lakhiani, co-founder of Mindvalley, and welcome to my new episode of Honest Conversations. And I have a very amazing guest today, a person I truly love and admire, and she's such a lovely woman. But more than that, she's marriage and family therapist and a best-selling author of Conscious Uncoupling. It's Katherine Woodward Thomas, and I'm sure if you know me or Vision, you would have heard about Katherine, because for us personally, Katherine has been that guide and light and teacher to go through our experience of conscious uncoupling. So of course, both me and Vision, we truly love and admire this woman, and I'm absolutely honored to have her as one of my guests of Honest Conversations. Hi, Katherine. Is it
Hi.
afternoon or morning where you are?
It is morning. I've got my morning coffee here, and I'm still waking up, so I'm happy to wake up with you.
It's beautiful, because for me it's evening. I have my evening sparkling water with me, and I'm about to, not about, but when we are done, I'll be probably having my dinner. So I'm ending my day with you. So thank you for that. And before we were starting, I was saying, I was joking that, I'm definitely not the person to give advice about marriage. But what's ironic about that is, since our experience with Vision, since we've announced publicly to the whole world, and being to some degree public people, apparently it matters, I've started getting a lot of questions about other people's marriages. Because, on one side, when we announced 1.5 years ago that me and Vision are going to go through the process of conscious uncoupling and not be husband and wife anymore, a lot of people had opinions about that, of course. But what I've noticed that since then, people come up to me and ask, so what do you think? And I know you're a therapist and you probably get this question a lot, but what do you think when a person comes and talks to you and says, so I have this situation, what do you think? Is anyone really in the position to give the advice, or is it something that is there like such a thing as red flags or do's and don'ts? These, go through this checklist and then you know that it is the case to separate? Or is it still something which you have to take a decision completely with your heart and plunge into that and, take the risk of going one way or the other?
Yeah, well, we live at such a confusing time. Our mothers, our grandmothers, it was very black and white. This is what you do. And we don't live in that world anymore. And I think there's a freedom to that, and there's a creativity, but it's also a little daunting, because it's a lot of responsibility, especially raising children. So here's the thing about happily ever after, that myth that we all aspire to. It was created when the lifespan was less than 40 years old, when people had very few options in life. So it's not really relevant to our current world. It's 400 years old. We can actually track it back to, believe it or not, Venice, Italy, which is still kind of the romance capital of the world. But it's a particular form of consciousness that came in, really, that had a lot to do with what was happening for people back 400 years ago in Venice, Italy. There was a lot of poverty, a lot of suffering, and they're kind of escapist fantasies, fairy tales. The pauper marries into great wealth, and everybody's well, and everybody's happy. And back in Venice, Italy, half the children were dying by the age of 16 because there was so much disease and illness. If you were born into poverty, you were going to die in poverty because there was no way out. There was even a law on the books back then that said that if that a noble person could not marry a commoner. And if you notice, all the happily ever after stories end with a noble person marrying a commoner. So it was born from people's desperate need for hope and to escape. And it sings, it makes our hearts sing. It's a beautiful story. There's a lot of wonderful things about that story that we want to keep, but it's not really relevant to the lives that we're living today, where we have so many choices and so much mobility. And also, we are on a growth trajectory. And the most important thing for human beings right now that's kind of waking up for the masses of us is the need to grow, is the need to actualize our potentials, to give our gifts, to be creative in the face of the many breakdowns that we're looking at. And so sometimes that's not going to be congruent with staying in a particular relationship. So back to your, great question, is it right for us to give advice? I think just as long as we're always saying, I don't know what's right for you, but my take on this is. So I'll contribute my wisdom, but ultimately each of us are making these decisions for ourselves, and we want to be able to discern wisdom and actually begin to make wise decisions. But some of the wisdom we've been kind of inheriting is not actually appropriate. So this whole idea of, divorce is bad for children. Stay together for the sake of the kids. Well, I'm not sure that's true, really. If you have a toxic divorce, that's very bad for children. If you have a toxic marriage, that's bad for children. If you have an uninspired marriage where somebody's depressed because the marriage is holding them back and it's no longer true for them to be in that relationship, that's bad for the children. So really what's good for the children is to model resilience, to model expansion, to model forgiveness, to model creativity and cohesion and being a conscious person and doing things consciously, and teaching the children self-responsibility and authenticity and all of those things that those little creatures are going to need when they grow up, because they're facing a challenging world, and who we've been is insufficient for the challenges that we're facing now and will be facing in future generations.
People often ask me these questions mostly because we've so publicly gone through the process, and I guess there is an impression that I know what I'm doing. To be honest, I still don't know, and it's 1.5 years later, and I still sometimes wonder, what have we done? Was it right? Was it not? I guess it's normal. It's human nature. But what I want to ask is, sometimes when I get asked that, what do you think? So that's how I feel. Do you think I should work on it? Do I think I should leave? I always sometimes almost feel that people want to hear this one argument that will make it okay to say, it's enough, I'm done. As if someone wants to hear a permission from me, it's fine, you're going to be okay, or it's fine, it doesn't make you a bad person. So I have this very strong feeling that the topic, despite the numbers, is still a great taboo. Even the amount of backlash I heard and criticism about our own decision, it is not the topic that people take easy. And I wonder, do you have experience? Why is it such a hard conversation in the 21st century, where we understand that people can have different diets, different exercise routines, different styles of work, but we are just not okay with different style of relationship for whatever reason?
I think people get very threatened sometimes. Relationships don't just belong to the two people in them, and you guys have such a public relationship. So you create stability. That whole saying that I don't know if they have an equivalent in Russia, but they say in English, that couple are pillars of the community.
Oh
They're the
God.
strength of the community. They're the solidness. They're what's grounding and anchoring the community.
Yeah.
So people, kind of feel safe in the world because they see you and they see vision. And, the world can be changing, but one thing is constant is Kristina and vision, right? And then you say, no, we're actually going to change the form of our relationship. We're going to shift. And then it feels like the world is unpredictable. And I think we are living in such unpredictable times that sometimes we get a little too attached to these the two couples being together or to certain institutions. And so right now, I mean, the qualities that we're all being asked to cultivate right now, I think are unprecedented in the human experience. Flexibility, creativity, resourcefulness, resilience, optimism, faith in whatever's happening. We're all needing to really cultivate these qualities. But I'm in such deep admiration of you and Vision that you have the courage, and this is what's really needed in the world, are people like you and Vision, because that you have the courage to, number one, decide to live an authentic life. And who knows if the choice you made is the right choice or the wrong choice? None of us know that for any of the choices we make. We just have to make a decision at some point to empower our choices. It took me several years after I divorced from my husband, I call him affectionately, my husband. It took several years for me to say, no, that actually was really the right decision. And now we're, more than a few years out, and it's very clear to me that that was an excellent decision. But it's not an easy one, and it's not one that you ever really know for sure, because the road not taken is the road not taken. So you can't quite know what that road might have been. But we all do the best that we can to live an authentic life and to live close to our guidance and our own deeper knowing.
But do you think that if society was a little more kind to people going through separation, that the process of separation would be easier on those couples who have to go through that? I'll try to explain why I'm asking that, because I heard this theory that we take emotions according to how our environment teaches us to feel those emotions. So, for example, jealousy is a more intense emotion in, let's say, Russian culture or Latin American culture, or the emotion of losing face, which is very familiar for Japanese, is a little less intense for Western culture. Do you think that it would be easier, more peaceful for couples if society as a general didn't consider separation as the end of the world?
Well, I think that's what happened with conscious uncoupling. When I created it, there wasn't anything like it, really. And then Gwyneth Paltrow got wind of it, and she popped it into the lexicon. And I can't tell, it was such a moving moment for me to then, read the news the next day and discover that conscious uncoupling was already in the dictionary as redefining divorce in the 21st century. That was a moment for me that was unbelievable, because I come from a toxic divorce. My parents had a very toxic divorce. Their rage at each other lasted for years, and in many ways colored my childhood, and then of course my early adulthood, because I had a lot of issues in relationship that really could be traced back to that. So for me to be able to take something on a personal level that had been so difficult and transform it was really just, I felt like really I could have just passed on then. I was just so full with gratitude. And I think that's true for all of us in our generation, is that that's our task, is to take everything difficult and begin to create new ways of being in relationship with each other that are much kinder and softer and more humane, really. So it's kind of the task of our generation to forge these new ideas and new ways of being loving towards each other. If we look at all of the evolution that all of us are engaged in, the end goal is to create more harmony and more unity and more grace in how we live in community with each other. And that's really the purpose of conscious uncoupling. I think the reason why people are so against it is because they think, well, somehow if you take the shame out of divorce, it's going to make it easier for people to divorce. And right? So it was never to take the shame out of divorce and to minimize the impact of divorce. Divorce is a serious decision. It's just to provide an alternative route, because the we human beings, we haven't quite caught up to our culture. We're kind of hardwired with very big emotions during divorce that can get us in a lot of trouble and create a lot of damage and a lot of hurt. And those emotions don't necessarily go away on their own. I mean, I have such the perfect family to have created this from, because my stepfather, who was my mother's third husband, but who adopted me because my own father somehow threw in the towel at some point and gave up parental rights. So, obviously a lot of trauma. But he was so angry with my mother. They divorced when I was 25. So this is coming up on over 30 years ago. And he just passed a few months ago, but he passed planning a lawsuit against her. They were divorced for 30 years. He was still trying to sue her for more money. He hated her. He hated her. He would sit at his desk for hours plotting how much she owed him still.
Okay.
So I know firsthand that these big feelings don't always go away. Time doesn't heal all wounds. We have to massage that hurt, massage that sense of embarrassment, massage that sense of unfairness, and we have to use it as fuel to grow and to make something beautiful of it. That's our task with every single hurt and injustice we've ever experienced.
It's so beautiful what you said, because the first thing that really triggered me was this idea of taking shame out of divorce, because no matter what people who haven't been through that might think, but every person who makes a decision to separate from a committed relationship, and I'm not talking just about marriage, any committed relationship, has this moment where you ask yourself, what did I do wrong? Where did I go wrong? And that sense of shame is probably the hardest part of a divorce. I want to ask a slightly maybe unfair question, because I don't think anybody has the answer. But a few years ago, I started wondering about the future of relationships in the humankind. We had Mind Valley event, which was themed, relationships, I think. It was about sex and relationships. We had it in Ibiza. And I heard this interesting thought from one of our speakers. She said that monogamy is the most complex form of relationships. And if we are absolutely honest, most of us are not in monogamous relationships, because monogamy essentially means one partner for life, one partner for the whole life. We generally go through a row of relationships, and that actually started me on the thought of thinking that, yes, we do go on a row of relationships, and at some point that pattern kind of stops, which is understandable. We want to commit, we want to start a family, we want to start a life. And from that moment, saying this relationship is over becomes impossible, because it is, it is shameful. So do you have any idea what is the future of relationships in the humankind? Is there one scenario that people will be following, or will it be okay to actually discover and think about alternatives? Because I don't have that answer for myself, but for years I've been wondering, is there a right answer? Because the truth is that that most people, not everybody, not 100%, and I do believe in true love, believe me, but most people go through periods of where they fall in love or fall out of love, or they fall in love and they're in a relationship and the emotion stops being the same. And this topic, just the fact that it's taboo is bugging me, because why can't we just talk about that and stop being so uptight and dishonest about it, So do you have an answer? Sorry.
Well, I don't know if I have an answer, but I have thoughts like you do, right? I mean, one thing that I do know is that we are born for bonding. We are relational creatures. And I think that sometimes those of us who are on a personal development path minimize our need for relationship because we see it almost as peripheral, sidelined
Mm.
to growth and development and actualization, or or our career path, which might be filled with a sense of purpose. And I think the truth is that relationship is what allows us to fulfill on our purpose, and that we actually need each other in order to become our full potential selves. So I don't know that I'm not necessarily saying we need one person, but we do need others who see us, who get us. We're tribal beings. One of the wonderful things that's happening in the world right now, and David Brooks wrote a great article about this, um, that was in the Atlantic not too long ago. I can't remember the title of it, but he was talking about the changing face of family, and how many of us are forming families with communities of people, and how how young people are even kind of finding tribes. They're not ready to maybe marry somebody or have children quite yet, but they'll form a family of friends, and they'll live with those friends, and they'll be invested in those friends, and and grow together, and work out a lot of the kinks of relationship together, so it's more of a committed thing as opposed to a kind of casual friendship where people can come and go. So I do think that we need commitments with people that we know we can count on, who are there for us, even when that might be more difficult to do because we're sick or we don't have a lot to contribute because we're going through something. So we're not always having to kind of earn our right to be with somebody or entertain someone, or that we can just feel loved and supported for who we are. I think we all need that. And a lot of us don't have that necessarily with our family of origins. Some lucky people do, but not everybody does. But if you have it as only one person can fulfill that, and you're kind of withholding your love until you meet that one person, that's a recipe for unhappiness. I think we all need a place to be able to give our love. But if you look at things from an evolutionary perspective, which I love to do, first of all, the love match is relatively new, maybe 200, 300 years old at most. And when people started marrying for love, and not just because it was, the exchange of property or the joining of, landholders together, um, these very practical, grounded reasons, which tended to last a long time. Once you start marrying for love, what people were, upset about, who were against that, where they were saying you're going to destabilize marriage. It's going to not be for life anymore. So they were right,
Right,
actually.
yeah.
They were right. But here's the thing about human beings. You start to study the science of how we've found a way to belong to each other. You see that this nuclear family that we all kind of aspire to and hold as the most sacred under God was just one form of family. There's all sorts of ways to be in community with each other. There's a wonderful book by Stephanie Coons called, I think it's Marriage, a History. I think it's probably a more complex subtitle, but she's a wonderful anthropologist for relationship. And one of my favorite tribes that she talks about is there was a tribe called the Nan tribe, I think, in China. And the primary family unit was brothers and sisters. So the brothers and sisters lived together and co-raised all the children. And then lovers, partners would kind of come and go. And that was actually a very stable family unit because brothers and sisters are pretty stable.
That's true.
So it's just remembering that, our particular moment in history and what we hold as the right way to be in relationship is it's just a hiccup on the evolutionary timeline. but what we're all aspiring to, and I love our community here at Mind Valley, and I just want to thank you so much from the bottom of my heart for how the miracle of what you've created is that everybody here cares about love, and they care about really becoming part of the evolution of consciousness in the world, aspiring to greater levels of unity and harmony and goodness and beauty and truth. And that's what we're all doing together. We're doing it internally in our own lives by becoming more conscious people, but it's in service to creating a more conscious world. So to me, that's the North Star. The North Star is not stay together no matter what. That to me is just an evolutionary relic of, one way to do things, but it's not the God I worship. The God I worship is profoundly creative, profoundly, flexible, and ever recreating what needs to be recreated, making something beautiful out of everything ugly, making beautiful trees out of, cow poop. So
Yeah. Actually, for people who are listening, if you haven't read Katherine's book or haven't followed her work, I strongly recommend, because Katherine is full of amazing wisdom and kindness. So definitely do so. But I want to ask another unfair question, because that's
okay, good.
that's unfair. By unfair, I mean it's there may be not an obvious answer. So in theory, and I'm a very liberal person, in theory, I believe that people should be allowed to do what they feel, how they feel, follow their heart. And I am okay with all sorts of family units. But when it comes to myself, it's a different story. So I am in theory fine, but when I try to picture myself, let's say in, the classical scapegoat open marriage, I cannot imagine that, because I have a feeling of propriety. So I wonder, do we as a society, do we have to reevaluate our emotion of jealousy and this idea that in a relationship we own another person? And what I've noticed, that my relationship with Vision has actually improved dramatically since we released each other, because I suddenly realized that I do not own another person. And on one side, I do feel that I know Vision a little less. I see him more as a mystery now, because he doesn't belong to me and he doesn't have to behave that the way I expect him. But on the other hand, there is some tension out of the relationship, some expectation, some demand. So what do you think? Are we a little messed up with our jealousy and the idea that, I own you now, and you are answerable to me for everything that happens in your life?
Well, that's a really thoughtful question. I think about people in the polyamorous community who are dealing with that all the time and seeing that actually as a spiritual path. And I have respect for people who have the devotion to living that kind of a lifestyle with impeccable integrity, being accountable, being, honoring your word. I mean, I think polyamory as a lifestyle would require great integrity in order to have it work, but also kind of narrows one's spiritual path to have to work through all those issues in relationship with another person. So I think ideally, but I personally wouldn't do it either, if one, for lack of time, because I'm like, it's enough for me to deal with one person. But I do think that I tend to be very kind, even, I think, Kristina, to these shadow emotions, and I think that jealousy, this idea that someone has something that I don't have, that I'm in scarcity, or I'm denied something, is something to be tender about, because probably if you track all of these darker emotions, um, very often there's a traumatized self underneath that. A lot of the work that has grown over the years for me, because I have been working so close to the bone, so close to the heart and soul of people in their relationships, both with calling in the one and conscious uncoupling now, is the consciousness from which we're creating relationship. And so, and most of us, because relationships are so primal, will kind of get triggered into a more primal self, and that tends to be a younger, traumatized self, as opposed to being able to stay in an adult center, the true self. So it's either we're kind of doing relationship a lot from the traumatized self as opposed to the true self. So I'm interested. So it's almost a different answer to the question, like which self is feeling jealous, right? Because a lot of the jealousy coming up from the traumatized self is almost a made up story. You spoke to that person, or there was just a spark there, but nobody actually did anything. This is just life being life, right? The sunshine just kind of, the sunshine went a certain way. The sun was out, and there was a moment. Well, you can't really be jealous of that in a way that's from an adult center. Maybe from an adult center, you look at that and a true self where you know your value, and you know that the world is kind of limitless potential, and that you can have whatever it is that you're willing to be responsible for standing for and for generating. And then you say, oh, look at that, my beloved is so gorgeous that other people see that too. Isn't that wonderful that my beloved had that moment of spark, and but it's going to be juicy at bedtime tonight. So from an adult center, you can see that. But if you're insecure, and you have places within you that are younger, but you haven't learned how to hold those places or how to help yourself to make more empowered meaning, then the jealousy will burn at you, and it will become a kind of difficult, toxic dynamic in the field between you. So I'm really interested now, and the next stage of my work that I'm really interested in moving into is this kind of, who is the I in I love you? Which self are we creating relationship from? And maybe some jealousy is appropriate. Maybe somebody's crossing a line, and you have to renegotiate the agreements between you so that you get clear on expectations. Because the reason why we get unhappy in relationships is because we have expectations that are not being met. Expectations are directly related to happiness. So what I'm hearing you say is, I've adjusted my expectations, and now I'm happier in the relationship. Right? So expectations are really important to look at. And there might be something happening that's showing you that you have expectations that the other person is not really in agreement with. And then those things need to get dealt with. And you need to come to terms with what the actual agreements are between you.
So, I'm still struggling with this whole feeling of people owning each other in a relationship. And I feel, I guess I'll give a slightly different approach to that. I heard this idea from another friend of mine about a year ago. And the idea was that the problem with the way we see relationships right now is that when we are in a committed relationship, we promise to each other that we almost, that we are together because of the promise, especially if it's a marriage, but not because you are the best person for me. So the point was that, if our relationships were in essence based in freedom, personal freedom, I am with you, but you owe me nothing for that. You don't have to be with me. You are with me only because I'm the best person to be with for you. Do you think we as a humanity are able to give up this idea of owning someone, like even with children? And I know it's a different kind of relationship, but even with children, parents often believe that, maybe subconsciously, that children belong to them. So they have to do as I say, as I decide. You have to listen to me, you have to respect me, not because you have the free will to do so, but because you belong to me.
See, I see that so this is interesting, because I see the spiritual ideal of non-attachment, the spiritual ideal of complete freedom, as a little separate from the contract of relationship.
Mm.
I actually like that saying that says love is unconditional, but relationships are not.
Ah,
And
beautiful.
I think relationships are about agreements that we make with each other.
Mm-hmm.
And so in that sense of the word, does someone own me? Well, not, not like property like in the old days, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think when we pledge to one another, we are pledging fidelity over certain things. So even in a polyamorous relationship, you're pledging certain fidelity.
Mm-hmm.
You have my heart, you have my full attention, you matter to me, you're at the core of, what life is about for me. The agreement I have is to care for you, whatever those
Mm-hmm.
agreements are. But I think that relationships are something that we enter into consciously to make contracts with each other, and that many of the problems is that we're not clear about what those agreements are, or we have expectations about what the agreements are because we're bringing kind of the whole paradigm with us from our ancestors of what marriage means or what we saw in our parents' relationships. So we have these kind of unconscious pulls towards certain things, and I think what we're aspiring to in conscious relationships are conscious agreements so that our expectations with each other are actually clear. And those things are hard to talk about. Sometimes we want to create intimacy sexually more than we do to really get kind of naked emotionally and telling ourselves, like, this is my expectation. Are you in agreement with that? So sometimes those things are hard to talk about, but that's where the real
Mm.
connection gets healthy, truthfully.
It's such a beautiful answer. I really love this idea that love can be unconditional, but relationship is actually about agreements that we make. Uh, Katherine, I want to ask this question. So you are rewriting your first book, Calling in the One, after more than 10 years, right? So
Yes, it came out in 2004.
yeah, it is. Wow, it's a long time now. So,
Mhm.
can you say what's new? What is there something that has changed dramatically since that time? And what is your biggest discovery in the past 16 years?
Well, yes, thank you. And I have had the honor of working with so many thousands of people since the book came out. So the book was actually where I began. I did it a little backwards. It
Hmm.
was back in the days when you could get, it was just like right at the tail end of you could get a book deal with a major house without having an audience yet, right?
Hmm.
That switched soon after. So I got in under the wire. So I wrote this book and then I started teaching. And the book became a bestseller, and so I had thousands of people come to me, really, because that was also when online learning started, which allowed thousands of people to come. So I have refined the process so much. I'm kind of amazed that the original book is still so powerful for people, even though it was where I began. But it was bothering me for the last few years that what I've learned and really refined over the years wasn't yet in the book.
Hmm.
So, for example, in the third chapter, I'm talking about I called it healing core wounds. But what ended up becoming was really about this core love identity and the identity that we crafted in response to what was happening in our universe when we were very young, sometimes even in back in the womb, and the consciousness that formed that became a sense of self. And that, and you can have a very successful career, you can have areas of your life where you're really thriving and shining. But the
Hmm.
moment you start to feel that interdependence, where you start to need someone in the way that nature has designed us to need someone, not in an unhealthy way, but in a healthy way, how we can go back into the old love identity of I'm alone or I'm not wanted, I'm not safe here, and then start acting from that center in a way that pulls on the other person to act out that story.
Mm.
And I really started to unpack the mechanism of that. And I found right now I'm working with 22 core identities and the
Wow.
predictable patterns of behavior that come from those identities that literally enroll people into acting that out and rewounding a person. So this whole idea of how are you the source of your experience got really, really clear to me in how we're generating these patterns. And the process of waking up out of the trance and mapping out the new ways of relating and the new development that would actually graduate us from that so that we can leave all of those toxic patterns behind. And this is kind of radical even in the psychotherapeutic community. People haven't mapped this out yet. It's a little ahead of its time, which is why I really want to develop it in the next couple of years and write another book on it, about the predictable patterns of behavior that, number one, will recreate a pattern, but number two, will graduate us from it such that it becomes a non-issue. And I know that for myself, for example, I struggled for years with very codependent patterns. I was really drawn to narcissistic people. And you can stay in therapy or you can stay in, whatever personal development you're doing and kind of unpack those patterns for years and make very slow and steady progress. But with what I'm discovering and working with in my community is you can actually graduate from them very, very quickly. Because the moment, let me give you a very clean example. So getting out of theory. So if you have an identity of I'm alone, you had a very negligent parents and would leave you in the crib. I mean, even back in my generation, I'm in my early 60s. Back in my generation in the 50s, the number 2 selling book in America, number 1 was the Bible. Number 2 was Dr. Spock, How to Raise Babies.
Oh, God.
That the advice he was giving was let the babies cry.
Oh, yeah.
Don't go in, don't pick up the babies, don't hold your baby too much. Because he was saying if you hold your baby too much, you're going to create dependency. So there's a whole generation of people my age who have this major I'm alone core love identity. And so that there's certain ways of being that we develop inside of that identity. We're very self-sufficient. We're givers as opposed to good receivers. How other people will experience us is that they really like us, but they don't feel like they can find a way into our world. And the corresponding belief about I'm alone is that other people always leave or they're not there for me. So I'll get, for me, I got involved with unavailable people all the time because, of course, predictably unavailable people, if they're married, and I had a thing about married men for years. If they're married, they don't show up for you. They're not there for you. So it's a perfect structure to rewound and re-engage the I'm alone story. One of the mechanisms that I saw in that about how we're creating our own experience is that when somebody, and I'll talk about myself, but I think it's relevant to a lot of people, but when I would get disappointed by someone, I would put up a wall. I'd kind of dismiss that person in my heart. They were off the A list. And I wouldn't even tell them really. It would just be a subtle kind of thing. And so what I realized is that was a mechanism of how I was creating aloneness. That I would so easily go to cutting someone out, putting up that wall internally, which sometimes they'd end up leaving because people can feel it,
but I can relate maybe to something, but the logical part in me says, Russians have the saying, they say there is no judgment to a no. So I would never, I can't even imagine how do you behave in another way. If somebody disappoints you and dismisses you, you're like, obviously there's no judgment to know. So I'm going to put up the wall or turn my back and leave first. So I can't even imagine how do you behave differently.
Right, but it creates, if you're really deconstructing, so the waking up out of I'm alone is, the truth is that I came here to love and be loved. And the truth is that I have the power to learn how to have much richer relationships than I've ever had before. Much, much healthier, much happier connections with others. So now I have a possibility that didn't exist before, but it's going to require me to start to change. somewhat and have new ways of being. So now when someone disappoints me,
Mm-hmm.
instead of just putting up the wall, which creates aloneness,
Mm-hmm.
which I could do if I want, but I actually know to take a contrary action, which is to pick up the phone and say, look, I'm calling you because I love you and my feelings are hurt. Can we work this through? Because you matter to me. And that creates a whole different experience. I mean, I had this with my mother for years. This is a good one with my mom.
Mm-hmm.
So this is how this works, right? So my mom and I have very difficult relationship, just like a lot of mothers and daughters do. And I would, she's my number one person that I've been disappointed with, and maybe that's so for her too. I don't know, but it's been a difficult connection for both of us. So I would go, and my mother and I would go for months without speaking. When one of us would be disappointed, we would do that to each other. We would go for 6 months and nobody call each other. So we were very disconnected. I noticed when my daughter was a teenager, I felt very disconnected from my daughter because
Mm.
she had a wall up to me. She was doing that to me.
Oh, she learned it from you, probably, right?
Probably, right? Probably. And it was painful because we love our kids. We don't want our kids to be putting up walls and shutting us out. So inside of this, because I hold myself accountable to live my own teaching, when my mother did something that was disappointing and pushed me away, I picked up the phone and I said, I'm going to come down and visit you. I'm in California. She was in Florida at the time. She said, well, don't come all this way just to see me. I said, yeah, I'm going to go all that way just to see you. I'm going to come visit you. So this is just me practicing what I preach. So I went down. We actually had a lot of fun together. We had a great time. We bonded. We got over whatever our disappointment was. We had a really lovely visit. And when I came home, my daughter was more open to me. So even though they were not directly related,
Mm.
in the field, they were related. So there was something about, so when I talk about how we're the source of our experience, if
Mm-hmm.
I'm creating distance with my mother, it's coming back to me through my daughter. And when I went and just took a contrary action, I made relationship more important than self-protection in that moment,
Mm.
right? Now, my mother wasn't doing anything too super toxic, so that was fine to do that. She was just being herself, and I got triggered about something. So, but I'm just saying. So now the experience I have, and I still, go into those moments where I want to shut down with my mother, but I keep generating relationship. I do that because, Kristina, my life is richer in a field of relatedness. And the truth about my relationship with my mother is that sometimes she really comes through for me. And I would miss those moments if I just had up my wall. So it's a choice but I don't have the I'm alone anymore. And
Mm.
I have now a beautiful new man in my life, and we're building a life together. So the I'm alone story is not as prevalent because I'm owning the truth, the true Katherine. I really did come here to love and be loved. I am relational at my core. And I'm now taking actions from that center. And that creates a very different life. So when you ask me, like, what's different about calling in the one, it's just a much clearer, more sophisticated role. I think I'm taking very complicated ideas that we've been mulling around in therapy for a while, and I'm actually making it quite simple. Because here's the thing, we can have all this insight into our past, but unless you know how to begin to generate life differently outside of that old story,
Mm-hmm.
it just is kind of talk and, interesting understanding. It kind of explains why we are the way we are. What I'm interested in is what's going to create an experience that's outside of the wounded story, that's not even in that story anymore. What's going to create, if you've lived in poverty all your life, what's going to create financial well-being and even wealth?
Mm-hmm.
If you've lived in, poverty, relational poverty your whole life, what's going to create happy, healthy love? That's of interest to me. So that has to do with being able to really step into the truth of who you are, the power of your creativity, the power of setting an intention for that future, and your willingness to become who you'd need to be in order to be living that future.
Mm. When is your new book coming out?
And in the spring.
Next year.
In the spring, yeah,
Oh
in
God.
February.
So I want to ask, probably I don't have time for many more questions, but this question probably is important. So for people who have been out of a relationship for a long time, and I really don't know why people stay out of the relationships. I've not been in a relationship since our separation. So sometimes I think we are not ready. Sometimes I think we don't meet the person. But is there anything they can do to set the wheels in motion? Because on one side, you don't want to rush. I mean, if you're not ready, you're not ready. Don't rush it. Or if you haven't met the person, you haven't met the person. Don't go jumping on everyone you see. But is there anything we can do to set the wheels in motions, or to maybe even get them the hope that something is out there and something is happening?
Absolutely. That's a
Yeah.
great question. Well, so for conscious uncoupling, I always remind people that your next relationship won't begin when you meet your next partner, but with how you end with this one,
Mm,
right? So there's a process that you want to go through inside of a commitment to have your next relationship not duplicate some of the painful patterns in the relationship you're leaving.
mm,
And so that's an inner reflection, that's self-responsibility, even if it was so many reasons why you think it was the other person's fault. I always tell people, just even look at your 3%, because your 3% really matters in how you gave your power away, in how you stayed silent,
mm,
in how you didn't negotiate your needs or didn't follow your intuitive knowing, or all of the ways that we kind of even covertly dumb ourselves down in relationship or sacrifice ourselves in ways that are actually unhealthy. So I really encourage, and that is, of course, a large part of conscious uncoupling, is to set you up to have a great relationship the next
mm,
time around. So you harvest all the growth. But I think in calling in the one, we start with the future that you're committed to, and really begin to imagine not just the qualities of the person you want in your life, but the actual qualities of the connection between you. And then, and actually, I love Michael Beckwith's visioning process, which I was attending Agape when I created Calling in the One, and it really influenced the creation of Calling in the One, where Michael created the visioning process of how he even created the Agape community, which was to sit in the visioning. Imagine you have those qualities of connection now. You're feeling really seen. You're feeling really safe, really supported. You're feeling inspired, turned on. The two of you are laughing. Maybe you hear their laughter. You smell the dinner they're cooking for you, so you get it in your body and your senses. And then you say, what would I need to give up in order to manifest this love, this relationship? And you listen. And then you ask, what would I need to embrace and cultivate? How will I need to grow myself into who I would need to be in order to sustain this, to have this? And then you listen again, and then you ask, and what's my next step? So that you become a co-creator of that future. But a lot of the work that I'm oriented towards is the future.
mm,
And so a lot of times, a lot of us are doing our work, we're looking at the past and we're connecting the dots. I think that's sacred work and holy work and conscious work. It's not necessarily the work of miracle making.
mm,
Miracle making is about the future you're standing for, which from where you're standing right now looks like it couldn't happen, no way ever.
mm,
But you just stand for that, and you begin to weave that into the manifest world. And that's actually what Calling in the One is. I'm happy to give you a sneak peek by by sending the manuscript
Oh,
to
that
you
would be
if you
so
want to
awesome.
start
Yes,
now.
of course I do. God, I feel so suddenly like, oh, thank you.
You let me know. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
You know, I was just thinking to myself, there were so many questions I needed to ask, I had to ask, and obviously I'm not going to right now. One question which I know a lot of people are asking is, you know, if I'm ready for the conscious uncoupling, but my partner isn't, and you know, people who are coming out of really hard relationships, and also the heartbreak. You know, there's so many things I wanted to talk about, and I haven't been, haven't had the chance. But I
Well,
hope.
let me just say that that conscious uncoupling is written for the individual.
Yeah.
There are couples who, both conscious people want to do it, but even if you're doing it with a partner, you tend to be a little out of sync with each other. You know, you each have your own experience with it. Very often I'll work with people, and I give them, if I work with an uncoupling couple, I'll give them each their own coach so they can go at their own pace doing the program.
Mm.
But then there's a reference point for us to, you know, sort out some of the things that need to be sorted. But it's not, you know, Gwyneth and Chris, and now you and Vision, you kind of made it a very public thing, and it looks like the two people are in sync.
Mm.
But, you know, but it's not
It's not so.
necessarily needing to be
No.
done that way. No.
Yeah, that I can say from personal experience. We have the same intention, and that has been the same, but the process hasn't been the same for sure.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
So
it's for people who just want to do it, because even if you had a breakup a long time ago and you're not over it yet, it's to heal your heart. It's to help you to not have prolonged grief, or what therapists call complicated grief. It's to be free and to reclaim your soul and your heart and be liberated to love on the other side of it.
Thank you so much. I really wish we had more time, but maybe I'll convince you to have another chat with me, and maybe we'll talk actually about heartbreak, because I think this is something people don't talk about. There's shame in that as well.
Yeah, there is. Thank you. I'd love to come back and do that.
Thank you so much. Thank you everyone who joined me today. I have to put down my mic to do my traditional thing. I know it's not live, it's pre-recorded, but still it's important. Please leave your love for Katherine by leaving hearts, by leaving hearts and comments, of course. And thank you so much for coming and for sharing your wisdom. And I feel I need to talk to you more, because this is the area which is so important for every single one of us, and we often just put it aside as if, you know, as if it's less important than career, than mission, than doing the important stuff. But it is probably one of the most fulfilling areas in our lives. So thank you so much for this conversation, and for your wisdom and for your experience that you have gone through, so that you get to actually share it with the people who will hear this.
Thank
And
you.
thank you everyone. See you hopefully next week. Bye.